Hi, everyone. My name's Inay Prakash. I'm one of the cinema programmers at Maysles Documentary Center in Harlem. For those who are unfamiliar, Maysles is a cinema and education center, and we're here to kick off the Youth Media Festival with a conversation with the legendary Steve James. And we're here also with two of the enormously talented student curators of the Youth Media Festival. So I'll go ahead and read Steve's bio and then kick it off to them. Academy Award nominated filmmaker Steve James, of course, filmmaker of Hoop Dreams and Life Itself, examines racial, economic, and class issues in contemporary American education in the 10-part unscripted documentary series, America to Me, which we're specifically discussing tonight. Poignant and funny, epic and intimate, America to Me spends an academic year at Chicagoland's elite Oak Park and River Forest High School, allowing its students, families, faculty, and administration to tell stories of the pressures and challenges teens face today in their own words. And now I'm going to kick it over to Fredi Guevara-Pripp and Reef Bly, curators of the Youth Media Festival.
Hi, my name is Fredi Guevara-Pripp. And I'm one of the youth curators for the Youth Media Festival.
Hi, Reef Bly. Also, one of the part of the community produces film festival. Yeah, it's just great being here.
Fredi, would you mind sharing your curatorial statement with us?
Yeah, sure, of course. I'm going to start off with a quote. True community is based upon equality, mutuality, and reciprocity. It affirms the richness of individual diversity as well as the common human ties that bind us together. This is a quote from Polly Murray. Streaming free from March 19th to April 2nd are 12 films split into 3 programmatic themes: experiences of COVID-19, social justice, and self-discovery. These documentaries together explore the untold stories of underrepresented communities and interrogate concepts of a monolithic experience between those who are oppressed. The 12 short films delve into themes of struggle and hardship while also presenting informative statistics and visually captivating imagery. Submitted globally, these selected documentaries offer a wide variety of unique young perspectives. We're delighted to showcase these carefully curated films. Join us on March 25th at 4 p.m. for a screening of 6 of these short films and a live Q&A for our Youth Media Film Festival. You can RSVP on our website, maysles.org. And if you'd like to stay updated on what we're doing and the festival, follow us on Instagram at Maysles Documentary Center.
Thanks, Fredi. I guess to kick things off, I certainly wasn't being facetious when I said the legendary Steve James. As a certified film school dropout from Chicago's Columbia College, I got the Cartemquin curriculum early on. And for those who might be unfamiliar, Steve, can you talk about the tradition you come out of and what Cartemquin does and sort of what your path as a filmmaker has been?
Sure. So I didn't grow up in Chicago. I grew up in Virginia, and then I ended up in grad school at Southern Illinois University. And then my wife and I moved up here to Chicago for me to start a film career. And I went to Cartemquin Films because Cartemquin is this institution here in Chicago in the independent film world that since 1966, I think, has been focused on making documentaries that deal with and address various social issues and realities of America. And they have quite a catalog of work they've done over the years. And so I approached them with this idea of what became Hoop Dreams way back in 1985. And we started shooting it in 87 and finished it in 93. And it premiered in 94. And since then, I've remained here and telling a lot of stories that focus on Chicago and Illinois, not exclusively. I actually did a film set in New York a few years ago about a Chinese American community bank, but but most of the work I've done has been focused here in Chicago, telling stories here or in the Chicagoland area, like this one, America to Me, Oak Park River Forest High School.
And Fredi and Reef, I know you watched part of that as part of your program you're in at Maysles. Is there anything that struck you or that you want to ask Steve about to begin with?
Yeah, first of all, I really, really enjoyed watching it. Like Allison said before, it just struck me as a young woman of color. And yeah, I saw a lot of myself and I saw a lot of my peers in this documentary, and I want to thank you for making it. I guess my first question would be, can you just explain your process while making this film?
Sure. So this was an ambitious undertaking. When I first pitched the idea to the school and the school board, I was thinking I would make a standalone documentary. And that one of the pushbacks from the school board was, given everything that you want to try to tackle, can it really be a standalone documentary or should it be longer? And I agreed with them that ideally it should be a miniseries. I did not anticipate it was going to be a 10-hour or 10.5-hour miniseries at that time, but it grew to that. But one of the things I also said is that we would bring together a very diverse team of filmmakers to tell this story, and we did that. So in addition to myself as a director, we had 3 other directors, Kevin Shaw, Bing Liu, and Rebecca Parrish, who are all younger than me, closer to those high school years than I am, which doesn't say a lot, but so collectively we went out and each followed certain kids over the course of the year or teachers, and worked collaboratively in that way. And then we were able to kind of interweave all of these stories over the course of a 10.5-hour series. I knew that we'd want to make it a single school year as a kind of frame of reference. So that's what we did. When we started out with 7 kids, and we added 5 others along the way, which was something I anticipated might happen, that as we were in the school and would meet kids and go, oh, this kid is really interesting, and this would be a good story to tell.
Reef, would you like to jump in?
Yes. One of my questions for Steve James was, when you got the idea or the opportunity to do this, what was one of the things in this film that you wanted people to walk away with?
Well, I think from the beginning, the thing that was the sort of the central question that I wanted the series to address. I didn't have the answers to this at all. That's why we made the series. But one of the things I wanted to address was, so many films, documentaries that have been made over the years, and there's some excellent ones, some incredibly excellent ones, have focused on the experiences of kids of color in schools that are generally in besieged communities, in public schools with limited funding, oftentimes in neighborhoods beset by poverty and violence. And, I think there's been an assumption that, well, of course, all of those social realities have a profound effect on what kind of education kids will get. And that's certainly true. But what was interesting to me about Oak Park was, yes, there are differing ranges of socioeconomic status here, from working class to quite wealthy. It's a very diverse community, but it has a very well-funded public school system, and it's an incredibly liberal community politically. So you would think that if any place would have figured out the inequities of education, it would be a place like Oak Park. And the reality is that it has not. So one of the central questions for me going into this series was, what's going on here? if you take some of those more obvious obstacles to equity off the table, if you will, and that's my dog shaking in the background. You know, what accounts for the inequities and disparities that go on in a place like Oak Park? And so that was the driving sort of question of the series. And I think that over the course of the year and the 10.5 hours, hopefully we get at some of the some of what goes on, because I think we came to believe as a filmmaking team that what was going on in Oak Park spoke to some of the deeper seated systemic racial issues that go on in America, regardless of where you live or your socioeconomic situation.
My next question would have to be, since making this piece, how have your views changed on this subject, if at all?
Yeah, well, I learned a lot. You know, I came into this film thinking, because of my history of filmmaking and the kinds of stories that I've been telling, I came into this film thinking that I knew more than I did. And that's pretty common with me. I'm aware enough now to know that I probably don't know that much, but if I'm honest with myself, I think I know more than I actually do. And the process of making any film or a series is one of really opening oneself up to really understand things on a much different level. And that certainly happened here. And so I think one of the things that I really got way more in touch with was the ways in which white privilege play out in a community like Oak Park and in America, I think, in general. You know, when we started the series, I thought that we would primarily focus our attention on kids of color, be they Black, Latinx, of Asian descent, or biracial, that was going to be our primary focus. And it's true that in the series as a whole, those stories dominate the series, but it became clear to me early on, and it was made clear to me by Shayla Holland, who was an assistant principal here, and she appears in the first 2 episodes. She said to me at one point when we were going into the project, she said, "Why are you not focusing on white kids?" And I was like, well, because, you know, it's about the inequities. And she said, you can't tell the story of kids of color and what they face in equity issues if you ignore white kids. And that was a revelation to me. And it took a while for us to get white kids and their families to participate in this film, because what happened is that the word got out that we were doing a film about racial equity in education at Oak Park River Forest High School. And that immediately made a tremendous number of white people nervous. And it made them nervous not only about what would we show, but also about their own participation. So it was a lot harder to get white participation. And that, you know, was surprising in some ways, because I'm a white filmmaker and I thought, well, I can certainly convince white parents to participate in this. But what I discovered was that, you know, white people, particularly, and I think liberal white people especially, are so self-conscious about race and fearful of how they might be portrayed and shown as being insensitive in any way, that it's better to just not participate than to run that risk. And of course, families of color don't think that way in general, in my experience. They looked at this series as playing a vital role to expose and show their reality. And so they were much more welcoming of the effort to do this film than the white community was. So that was certainly something I learned. I learned a lot, but that's an example.
One of my questions for you was, when you were doing this and you were with the families and all, can you tell us how you felt when you had seen the problems of the school and its staff, the racials and just the social standards and all the ties and division. Sorry.
I'm sorry. So you want to know what I thought of what I saw?
Yeah, what you felt. Doesn't really matter. It's really what you want to
Yeah.
say.
Well, some of it wasn't surprising, and some of it was very surprising. You know, part of my personal motivation beyond what I've already said in doing this series was, my wife and I, our three kids all came through the Oak Park school system. And our oldest was diagnosed with ADD. And as a result, in high school, he had a very difficult time in high school. And so we were dealing with that with him, and one of the things that just sort of really dawned on us is here's a white kid from a prosperous family, and we were very engaged parents. And we saw the sort of inequities of the way in which he was viewed within the school as a white kid. It just dawned on us, like, what must it be like for kids of color who find themselves in similar circumstances, and then it's compounded by race for them. And that was one of the things that made me want to do the series to begin with. So going into the school, some of the division within the school, the stratification was not surprising to me. For instance, it didn't surprise me that kids that were in the special ed classes were way overrepresented by kids of color. It didn't surprise me in the regular track that was the most integrated track within the school, and that in the college prep and advanced placement, the higher you went academically, the more white it became, to the point that in some of the higher academic classes, there might be a single white or a couple of kids of color in the class. Now, did that mean that they didn't deserve, that the kids didn't deserve to be in those? Well, no, it's a very complicated question as to how kids are put in tracks starting in junior high school, but especially by the time you get to high school. The whole tracking system is fraught with stereotyping and systemic racism. And so seeing that play out for some of the kids that we followed was very eye-opening for me, because I'm a white guy with white kids. But I was able, one of the kids I followed was Terrence. Terrence in the series is a special ed kid who's very shy and very quiet, and is the kind of kid that can disappear in a big school like Oak Park River Forest High School. And we saw some of the struggles that he went through as a quiet kid who lacked a lot of confidence in his academic abilities. But we also saw the way in which his mother was so bound and determined to do as best for him as she could. And, again, these kind of things cut against certain stereotypes that I think a lot of white people have about families of color in the school system. There's this assumption that a lot of white families make that Black parents aren't as engaged and don't care as much about their kids. It's ridiculous to say this, but these are stereotypes that are fairly prevalent in white households, including liberal households like ones here in Oak Park. People may not say that, they may not come out and say it, but they hold those stereotypes. So for us to be able to sort of go into the school system and see those things play out, and see the attitudes that play out in the community was very eye-opening. For instance, there's a Black teacher in the series named Mr. Williams, and he talks, his name is Tyrone Williams. And at one point in the series, later in this series, he talks about being the only Black AP teacher in this entire school. Now, this is a school with over 250 teachers. This is a huge school. He was the only AP Black teacher. And when white parents, not all of them, thank God, but a number of them, when they would see that their child had Tyrone Williams as their AP history teacher, they would go in and have their kid move to a different class, AP class, because Tyrone was code language to them that this must be a Black teacher. And they did not think a Black teacher could adequately teach AP history to their kid. Now, he's one of the best AP teachers at the school, but they didn't bother to look into that. They just made an assumption that their son or daughter couldn't get the proper AP level of education from a Black history teacher, which, he's brilliant, but that's not that, that they didn't even get to that point.
Sorry, Annie, were you gonna say something?
No, you got it, Fredi.
Okay. Similarly to just what you were just talking about, I'm just wondering if there's anyone that you interviewed specifically that left a lasting impression on you and why.
Oh my God, so many of these. I mean, Terrence left a lasting impression on me because I followed his story. I also followed his Tiara, who is his aunt. It's a very complicated family situation. Even though she's only a few years older than him, she's his aunt. So they both left a lasting impression on me. But I would also say Jess Stovall, the biracial English teacher who plays a prominent role in the series, left a very lasting impression on me because she was this incredibly dedicated teacher who had a style of teaching which I had not really seen before. And I have to confess that when I was first in her class in the beginning of the semester, I worried that she didn't have control of her class. Her whole approach is very collaborative with the kids. She's not this big disciplinarian teacher. And, the classroom struck me as fairly chaotic, honestly. And I wondered, is she really a good teacher? Well, as I watched the school year unfold, I saw the way in which she reached kids on a very direct, emotional, and personal level, and that her teaching style really was quite effective. And you see that over the course of the series with a kid named Kashan, who's one of the primary kids we follow in the series. He's a kid that's been very hard for teachers to reach, but Jess Stovall reaches him. And he's a really bright young man who has underperformed academically for a lot of reasons, but many of which is assumptions made about his abilities and an unwillingness to really reach out to him and try to pull him into the educational environment in the way that she did. So I came away with enormous respect and admiration for her teaching style, where at the beginning, I was like, not so sure, right? I had certain assumptions about what a teacher should be and how a teacher should teach.
Hold on, sorry.
I think Reef is at his cousin's birthday party, so just some background noise.
Sounds like a fun party.
In the beginning of the episode 2 of your documentary, America to Me, why, I mean, not why, but how did you feel when the counselor had left? And she was saying that she was leaving because of the board and because of what they represented.
You're talking about the assistant principal, Shayla Holland?
Oh, the assistant principal, yeah. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, she's another person that I learned quite a bit from. She was the person I said earlier who challenged me in terms of the series about telling white stories, not just stories of kids of color. We do a little bit of we play with the timeline there a little bit because I was so determined to have her voice in the series. She left at the beginning of the school year, and she was someone that I thought was going to be one of our primary subjects in the series because she was this very brilliant and tough principal, tough, not in tough with kids. She was wonderful with kids, but you know, not someone who stood up for the interests of kids against other administrators, including her principal. And so I thought she was going to be one of the central characters that we would follow, people we would follow in the course of the year. And then right before the school year started, she took a position as a principal at another school. And so I sat down with her and did this extensive interview, which is featured there at the beginning of episode 2, especially, where she talked about why she was leaving. And she talked about the fact that she felt more kinship with African-American girls, students in the school than she did with other administrators, meaning she felt that her, you know, the ways in which people looked at her was more akin to as if she were a student than someone who is, you know, the assistant principal of the school in charge of academics and brilliant to boot. So she talks rather emotionally about the pain of dealing with that. And so I felt like it was vitally important to include her voice in the series because she had so much insight, even though she had to move on. And, you know, she's now a principal. What's interesting about Shayla is that she's a principal at a school that is overwhelmingly white on the North Shore of Chicago, and from a very well-to-do community. And one of the reasons she took that job was that she told me she wanted to really sort of deal with racism in, as she's put it, kind of in the belly of the beast. She wanted to go to a place where, and when she took the job as principal, there was huge pushback from the community, the overwhelmingly white community, that she was way too radical politically to have this position as principal. And she even had a bodyguard for a long time, her first year as principal. But she was determined to go into that environment and be principal and represent and challenge people in that community around issues of race and representation, which, you know, I thought was incredibly brave, but that's the kind of person she is.
In light of the events in the past year and also since your docuseries came out, the pandemic, the focus on the BLM movement, and the recent increase in hate crimes towards the AAPI community, how do you see that affecting the students and the teachers that you worked with for this film?
Well, you know, I haven't checked in with you know, Jess Stovall left the school and went to Stanford. She's getting her PhD. And part of the reason she left, I mean, it's good that she's getting her PhD, but part of the reason she left was she didn't feel valued by the administration at the school. And so it was not just a move that she made simply because she wanted to get, you know, an advanced degree. So, you know, I think that I know that the school has wrestled with what's going on as a whole, because the students there in the last couple of years have become much more vocal and activist in a very public way around these issues. They have decided that kind of enough's enough, that there's always been too much talk in the community about equity and about making change and not nearly enough action. That people have talked a good game, but not really acted in a way that's really made for real change. So they've become way more vocal and way more active, and I think they're starting to have a real impact. Also, one of the teachers that's not a main, character in our series, but he's memorable. His name's Anthony Clark. He's a Black teacher who runs an after-school program where kids are doing rap and hip hop performances. You see him later in the series, especially. When we were filming, he had all of these political feelings and strong feelings, but he was not very vocal at that point. And since the series was completed in the last few years, he has become a galvanizing force in this community around these issues. And he's become a lightning rod. In fact, he ran for Congress. He didn't win. He ran for Congress here in Illinois twice. And now he's running for trustee in Oak Park, which is, a much more local position. But I think he has a very decent shot at being elected because he's just determined to make change. And he's become sort of the, I would say, central Black activist of this community, at least in the public sphere. And so it's been great to sort of see that transformation for him, because I met Anthony in the course of making the series, and he, like I said, he had these thoughts, he had these ideas, but he was not someone that was that active at that point in time.
Well, for me, this one's my last question. I watched a lot of your interviews like last night, trying to come up with these, but the main one that I could never find of someone asking you was, why did you come up with the name America to Me for this documentary?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was trying to figure out, we collectively were trying to figure out what we're going to call this thing. And so at one point, it's funny, sometimes titles come to me early on. Hoop Dreams, I had the title before I had the movie. I did a film called The Interrupters where I had the title before the movie was started. But sometimes titles don't come easily, and you get into the process of making the film, deep into the process, before you can figure out a title. And that was the case with America to Me. So at one point, I decided to start looking at poetry that had been written about, the Black experience, or the, poems focused on equity, and I just started to read a lot of poems. And when, years ago, I'd heard the Langston Hughes poem, but I'd forgotten it. And when I came across it again, it just seemed to speak so directly to what we were trying to do. And I know it's a famous poem, and it's a remarkable poem. I didn't realize just how famous it was at the time that so we were kind of bold in adopting it for our series. I might have, maybe not done that had I known it was quite so such a quintessential poem. But I knew it had a real following out there, and I just thought that it really spoke to the series because it's so honest about the experience, not just of Black people, but non-white people in America. It speaks to that experience while speaking to what non-white people have contributed to America. And then in very honest and unrelenting ways. But I also loved the fact that it has notes of hopefulness too, that he's not giving up on America. And by the end of the poem, he's declaring that very thing. And so it just felt like it felt like a poem that spoke in so many ways to what it is we were trying to make, because, we were, as a group of filmmakers, we were inspired by these kids that we followed. They were all, in our minds, very unique. They didn't fit the sort of stereotype. You know, we didn't follow the typical jock. We didn't follow the typical cheerleader. Tiara is not the typical cheerleader. Kendall is not the typical jock, nor is Gabe. You know, these kids that we followed, we found them to be unique, inspiring. We were amazed at how thoughtful and insightful they were about their own lives and about the world we live in. I mean, when I was their age, I was pretty much a complete idiot. And so, you know, these kids gave me, and I think, and my fellow filmmakers, a lot of hope for the future because they have so much to offer at such a young age. And like Jada, for example, who was one of our favorite people in the series. She's the, you know, the young woman who makes films. You know, Jada eventually went to Howard and got her undergraduate degree, and she's now at Columbia University in New York there in the master's film program at Columbia. She just was accepted. She'll start next year. And she's very excited about that. And, you know, I feel like Jada is someone, much like some of the other kids in the series, you're going to hear from Jada. You're going to hear from Shanti. You're going to hear from Kendall. I'm not saying they're going to become famous, but people are going to hear from them because they have so much to give and so much to offer and so much insight.
I love that a lot. I love that poem, and Langston Hughes is one of my favorite poets. I didn't know that was the inspiration for the name, and that, yeah, it's really cool. I really enjoy that. This is also my final question, but just going off of the last question I asked you, in the past year, it has become glaringly evident that the quote-unquote problem of race in this country is a white problem. It seems that you, a white documentary filmmaker, recognize this in your making of the film. What do you think white people can do to move forward and correct a problem that they created and continue to curate and benefit from?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I think that one of the things, you know, after American Me, we did this series called City So Real, which is a profile of Chicago in the midst of this important mayoral campaign. And the 5th episode takes place during the pandemic and in the wake of George Floyd. And so I was out in the streets a lot for that and filming. And one of the things that I found very inspiring, frankly, was how many white people were out and participating in marches and participating and going into communities to participate in marches that I know a lot of them had never been to before, and having their eyes opened and standing back and letting people of color lead, not them be the leaders. So I was really, you know, I found that very inspiring and very encouraging. The other part of me, though, was asking, is this more about getting Trump out of office, or is this about more genuine systemic change? And I think that question is, you know, we're a long way from answering that on behalf of white people's engagement. Because I do think there was a big motivation to want Trump out of office if your politics were, you know, at all liberal. You wanted him gone, and that fueled a lot of the activism. So what I'm hoping is that that's not over, that level of activism that we saw in the wake of George Floyd, now that Trump is gone, people don't think, well, I did that, I did my part, and I'm done, because we're not done. And I think that, you know, people have said, this is not my quote, but I believe it, that, you know, white people can't try to just be non-racist. First of all, that's impossible. You know, no matter how informed and how committed we are, we are always going to have to be battling up against racist ideas that come with being white, right? But I think it's important that white people's intentions move beyond just trying to not be racist, you know, as has been said, is to be anti-racist. So to actually engage in action and that changes things, doesn't just allow you to go to bed at night and go, well, I'm a nice person, you know, who wants good things for people of color. So, you know, it's an active effort that has to be made. And it's true. It can't be changed. Black people and people of color can't change America by themselves. Only white people engaged in that struggle can really change America, and change the world. So, you know, it's changed me too. I was someone who made a lot of films in this space about these issues. And I've had a tendency to think, well, because I make films about it, I've done my part. And I do think I've contributed by making these films. But I've also come to realize that I have to do more than just make films about it, that I actually need to engage in my community more directly. And I've started to do that more. I've done that more since America to Me. That was one of the lessons that I took away from America to Me.
Thank you so much for answering all of these questions. I really appreciate your answers.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys for great questions, and for taking on America to Me as a project for your festival. I really appreciate it. And I hope people, if they haven't watched it, they watch it. And if they've watched some of the episodes, that they keep watching, because it's, you know, some cool stuff happens. There's some great stories there. So, and best of luck with your festival as it goes on.
Yes,
Thanks.
thank you. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, so much for joining us. And thank you, Reef and Fredi. Incredible questions. I think, if anything, a meta commentary on the brilliance of young people. And
Exactly.
you know, but you know, do you want to go ahead and just share again the details of the festival and what people can catch next?
Yeah, totally. Festival actually went live today, and on our website, and it'll be a screening until April 2nd, and we have a live event on March 25th at 4 p.m. That screens 6 of the 12 short films, and a live Q&A with panelists and the filmmakers. So yeah, make sure to join us for that. You can RSVP on our website, and yeah, make sure to watch the rest of the films that are on our website as well. And you can look out as well on our Instagram. We'll be going live with some of the filmmakers. And yeah.
Great.
Thanks,
Well,
everyone.
Thanks for having me. Have a great weekend.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.